Chapter 5. Reflections in Still Water. Continued. Vision. The ancient temple complex lay in ruins beneath a sky torn by magical storms. Once magnificent columns had been reduced to shattered stone. Ornate mosaics cracked and scattered across floors, stained with blood and soot. The air shimmered with residual magic, jagged bolts of power in 9 distinct colors that crackled between heaven and earth. At the temple's heart, surrounded by the fallen bodies of their loyal defenders, stood the 9 sorceresses. Their once godlike forms diminished, yet still radiating dangerous power. They formed a defensive circle, backs to one another, facing the advancing rebel forces that had broken through their final protections. The first sorceress leaned against a fractured pillar, her golden radiance flickering unsteadily. Her features, though still indistinct to Thalia's perception, had taken on more definite human proportions as her power waned. Blood trickled from her temple, where a rebel's arrow had grazed her, physical evidence of newfound vulnerability that would have been unthinkable months before.
Hold formation,
she commanded her sisters, her voice retaining a trace of its harmonic quality, though lacking the overwhelming compulsion it once carried.
They cannot sustain this assault indefinitely.
The second sorceress gripped a blade of strange metal that glowed with accumulated power, her warrior's stance betraying the pain of wounds that no longer healed instantly. Crimson energy sparked erratically around her form as she faced the approaching rebels with defiant rage.
Let them come,
she snarled, raising her weapon.
I will send 100 more to the void before I fall.
Around them, the rebel forces advanced cautiously, a unified army of baseline humans and enhanced beings from every species. Former enemies fought side by side, their previous hierarchies dissolved in the heat of revolution. Sovereigns in rebel colors directed operations, their gold-flecked eyes burning with righteous purpose. Bellatory warriors moved in coordinated patterns, their battle trance markings glowing with unprecedented brightness, fueled by freedom rather than compulsion.
Forward,
called a scarred human at the vanguard, his weathered face bearing the marks of decades lived under sorceress rule.
Today we end their tyranny forever.
The rebels surged forward with renewed determination, voices rising in a battle cry that carried the weight of centuries of oppression. Their weapons, forged specifically to pierce enhanced defenses, glinted in the unnatural light of the fractured sky above.
The dream plague has severed nearly all worship connections,
reported the 5th sorceress, monitoring energy flows through a cracked crystalline device that trembled in her once steady hands.
Power reserves at critical levels. We cannot maintain defensive capabilities much longer.
Perhaps that is as it should be,
murmured the 9th sorceress, her void form more defined than in previous visions, the stars within her darkness dimmer yet still visible. Alone among her sisters, she seemed unsurprised by their predicament, almost accepting of what approached.
Silence,
hissed the first, golden eyes narrowing as she gathered what remained of her power.
We are the shapers of this world. We elevated these creatures beyond their base nature. We will not be defeated by our own creation.
The rebel forces closed in, weapons raised for the final assault. Their expressions reflected determination hardened by memories of loved ones sacrificed to the sorceress's ambitions, communities destroyed in pursuit of greater power, generations living under the weight of compulsion that stripped away free will. For all who fell before us, roared a massive Bellatory rebel, ritual scars crisscrossing his muscle-dense form as he charged toward the 2nd sorceress, wielding a massive hammer inscribed with freedom runes. The 2nd met his charge with her own battle cry, their weapons colliding in an explosion of crimson energy that momentarily blinded Thalia's perception. When vision cleared, the Bellatory lay broken on the temple floor, yet he had left his mark, a deep wound across the second sorceress's torso that leaked both blood and power in equal measure.
They grow stronger?
She gasped, genuine shock coloring her tone as she pressed a hand against the wound that refused to heal.
How is this possible?
The dream plague.
Answered the eighth sorceress. Her silver-white radiance dimmed to a pale glow as she deflected a volley of arrows with weakening telekinesis.
It doesn't merely sever our worship connections, it redirects the energy flow. What once fed our power now strengthens their resistance.
A wave of rebel fighters surged forward, overwhelming the Eighth's defenses. Dozens of weapons struck simultaneously, blades and arrows and spears piercing her diminished form from every angle. She crumpled to her knees, silver-white energy bleeding from multiple wounds. "She falls!" shouted a rebel fighter, triumph blazing in his expression as he raised his bloodied spear. "The gods can die!" The remaining sorceresses closed ranks around their fallen sister, channeling what power they could spare into a collective shield. The eighth's form flickered, dissipating into motes of silver-white light that should have signaled death. Yet instead of fading, the motes coalesced, reforming her body in a weaker but still persistent manifestation.
Not die.
She corrected, her voice barely audible as her partially restored form stabilized.
Never die. Only diminish.
Confusion rippled through the rebel ranks as they witnessed this impossible recovery. The human commander signaled for another assault, determination hardening his features despite this unexpected development.
Again,
He ordered.
strike them down as many times as necessary.
The battle resumed with renewed ferocity, rebels throwing themselves against the sorceress's weakening defenses with desperate courage. One by one, the 9 were struck down by overwhelming numbers. The third engulfed in her own flames as rebels redirected her fire back upon her. The fourth buried beneath a collapse of stone triggered by her own earth manipulation. The fifth's mind overwhelmed by a coordinated psychic assault from rebel cognita. The sixth consumed by shadows she could no longer control. The seventh impaled by wooden spears grown from her own plant manipulations. The eighth's wings shredded by precisely aimed projectiles. Yet each time a sorceress fell, her essence refused final dissolution. Their forms reconstructed from pure energy, weaker with each resurrection but stubbornly persistent. A fundamental immortality that transcended their diminished state.
Why won't they die?
Demanded the rebel commander, frustration and fear warring in his voice as he witnessed the first sorceress reform after being literally torn apart by coordinated bellatory attacks.
We've struck killing blows a dozen times over.
Their essence persists beyond physical form, explained a rebel sovereign, gold-flecked eyes studying the phenomenon with the analytical precision typical of his kind. They've transcended mortality itself. We can diminish them, contain them perhaps, but not destroy them completely. As this realization spread through the rebel forces, a murmur of despair threatened to undermine their resolve. All their sacrifice, all their courage, all their planning, and still their oppressors endured, weakened but immortal.
Then what was the point?
Questioned a young rebel fighter, her weapon lowering slightly as exhaustion and hopelessness crept into her stance.
If they cannot die, how does this end?
In that moment of collective uncertainty, the air between the rebels and the weakened sorceresses shimmered. A figure materialized from mist and starlight. The first walker, his partially substantial form stepping fully into physical reality with uncharacteristic solidity. His star-filled eyes surveyed the battlefield with an expression that held both sorrow and determination.
They cannot die while their power remains,
He stated, his multiple-voiced speech cutting through the battle's chaos with crystalline clarity.
but neither can they be allowed to recover. I have walked their dreams. I have seen what they would do if given another chance at dominion.
His appearance drew the attention of all present, rebels, and sorceresses alike. The ninth sorceress separated slightly from her sisters, her void form rippling with what might have been recognition as she regarded her first creation.
My child,
She acknowledged, her multiple-voiced speech barely audible in her weakened state.
you have chosen your path well.
I chose what you showed me was possible.
He responded, moving forward with fluid grace that seemed to exist halfway between ordinary movement and teleportation.
Through dreams, I learned what you had forgotten, that power means nothing without purpose, that divinity is empty without compassion.
He turned to address the assembled rebel forces, whose expressions ranged from confusion to desperate hope at this unexpected intervention.
I bring what you need.
He announced.
A prison that will contain not just their bodies but their essence. A crystal matrix that will feed upon their power rather than allowing it to feed upon others.
From within his misty form, he withdrew 9 crystalline seeds, each pulsing with internal light that matched the aura of the sorceress it was designed to contain. The object seemed to exist partially in physical reality and partially in the dreamscape, their geometries impossible to fully comprehend with ordinary vision.
Place these at the 9 points of containment,
He instructed, offering the seeds to the rebel leaders.
Once activated, they will grow into prisons specifically calibrated to each sorceress's unique energy signature.
And the cost?
Demanded the human commander, wariness tempering his hope as he studied the Dreamwalker's offering.
Magic this powerful demands sacrifice. What price do you ask for our salvation?
The first walker's star-filled eyes met the human's directly, his expression serene despite the weight of what he proposed.
The price is mine to pay.
He replied simply.
A conscious anchor, a being who exists between realms to serve as the bridge between physical reality and the dreamscape where the prisons must partially exist.
You would sacrifice yourself? Questioned the rebel sovereign, gold-flecked eyes narrowing in calculation. Why? The first walker's gaze swept across the battlefield, across the bodies of fallen rebels who had given everything for freedom, across the weakened sorceresses who had styled themselves as gods, across the living who watched with exhausted hope for an end to centuries of oppression.
I have walked in your dreams.
He answered simply.
I have seen your hopes, your fears, your loves, your aspirations. I have witnessed the strength that drives you to stand against beings you once worshipped as divine. How could I do less?
His words silenced questions, his quiet dignity more compelling than any grand declaration could have been. The rebel commander stepped forward, reaching for the crystalline seeds with reverent caution.
Tell us what to do.
He said simply. The first walker nodded, then began directing the placement of the seeds in a perfect nonagon around the 9 sorceresses, who had regrouped in the temple's center. Most were too weakened to attempt escape, while others, particularly the 9th, seemed to accept what approached with eerie calm. Around the perimeter, more dreamwalkers materialized, dozens of star-lit figures keeping respectful distance, but bearing witness to their leader's sacrifice. Their expressions conveyed solemn understanding. They had known, perhaps better than anyone, what this day would require. With the seeds positioned, the first walker took his place at the circle's center, directly facing the 9 who had created the world he now helped reshape. He raised his arms, his form beginning to shift between substantiality and mist more rapidly than before. The starlight within him intensified, burning brighter with each passing moment as he drew power from the dreamscape that had nourished his kind since their creation.
From dreams we came,
He intoned, his multiple voices resonating at frequencies that made the very air vibrate.
to dreams we return. What was scattered shall be contained. What was stolen shall be reclaimed.
The crystalline seeds responded to his invocation, rising from their appointed positions to hover in the air. They began to spin, slowly at first, then with increasing speed until they blurred into rings of light that pulsed in rhythm with the first walker's words.
by the connections that bind all dreamers, by the paths that link all minds, by the unity that transcends all division, I call upon the power of the dreamscape to manifest in physical form.
His body began to dissolve, not into the misty insubstantiality typical of dreamwalkers, but into pure energy that flowed into the spinning crystal seeds. With each passing moment, more of his form converted to power, feeding the manifestation of 9 crystal prisons that began to take shape around each sorceress. The 9 reacted differently to their impending imprisonment. The first sorceress raged, hurling what remained of her power against the growing crystal walls, only to see her energy absorbed and incorporated into their structure. The second fought physically, her warrior's spirit refusing surrender even in defeat. The others made their final stands according to their natures, with flame, with earth, with mind, with shadow, with growth, with flight. Yet all were gradually enclosed within prisons perfectly calibrated to contain their specific powers. Only the 9th sorceress stood still, watching with star-filled eyes as her first creation sacrificed himself to imprison her. Something like understanding passed between them. Creator and created, both existing between worlds, both seeing beyond the immediate struggle to the patterns that would follow.
The dreams will continue,
She said, as the crystal walls closed around her void form.
and someday someone will dream us free.
Perhaps,
Responded the first walker, his form now little more than a constellation of stars suspended in the temple's center.
but they will choose that freedom with open eyes, not through deception or compulsion. The dream belongs to the dreamers now.
With those final words, he dissolved completely, his essence flowing into the 9 crystal prisons simultaneously. Each structure sealed with a resonant chime that echoed across physical reality and the dreamscape alike. Where the sorceresses had stood, 9 perfect geometric prisons now towered, each pulsing with the contained power of its occupant, each unique in form, yet connected in purpose. Inside each prison, a sorceress remained visible yet completely contained, suspended in crystal that fed upon their power rather than allowing it to affect the outside world. The more they struggled, the stronger their prisons grew, creating a self-sustaining cycle that would endure for centuries. Silence fell across the battlefield as rebels witnessed the culmination of their age-long conflict. After a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, the human commander stepped forward, his weathered face reflecting awe tinged with uncertainty, as he approached the central crystal where the first sorceress raged in silent fury.
Is it truly over?
He asked, addressing the question to the remaining dreamwalkers who gathered around the prisons, their star-filled eyes reflecting the light that pulsed within the crystal structures.
The imprisonment is complete.
Confirmed a female dreamwalker whose form seemed stronger than the others.
They cannot escape by any means known to dreamscape or physical reality. But eternal vigilance will be required to ensure they remain contained.
And who will maintain this vigil when those who remember today are dust?
The commander asked, the practical question of a soldier who understood that winning battles meant little without securing the peace that followed.
We will.
She responded simply, gesturing to her fellow dreamwalkers who positioned themselves around the 9 prisons with ceremonial precision.
He prepared us for this task. We exist between worlds. Time moves differently for us. We will remember when all others have forgotten. We will watch when all others have turned away.
The commander nodded, accepting this commitment with the gravity it deserved. He turned to address his forces, raising his bloodied weapon in a gesture that signaled not triumph, but the solemn recognition of sacrifice.
Remember this day.
He called, his voice carrying across the ruined temple complex.
Remember what we fought for. Remember what was given, so that we might live free of compulsion, free of worship, free to choose our own destinies.
As rebels raised their weapons in acknowledgement, Their expressions reflected the complex emotions of victory bought at tremendous cost, relief tempered by grief, hope shadowed by uncertainty, freedom heavy with responsibility. From within her golden prison, the first sorceress watched with calculating eyes, her rage temporarily contained but not extinguished. Even in defeat, she planned, her gaze holding a promise that transcended her prison's walls. A promise that someday someone would listen. Someday someone would dream her free. Vision. The dreamscape shifted around Thalia, colors bleeding into one another until they formed the interior of a modest cottage nestled against a hillside. Moonlight filtered through a single window, casting silver patterns across a simple wooden floor worn smooth by years of careful tending. A fire crackled in a stone hearth, its warm light creating a sanctuary of golden comfort against the desert night's chill. A woman sat beside the fire, her hands moving with practiced precision as she worked a needle through fabric stretched on an embroidery hoop. Aislinn Norwood, Elian's mother in her youth, though still bearing the self-contained strength that would later define her in Thalia's time. Her chestnut hair fell loose around her shoulders, catching amber highlights from the flames. Her features held a quiet determination, a resilience forged through solitary independence in a world that offered little mercy to those who walked alone. The air in the room shimmered, not with heat, but with something more fundamental, a subtle distortion in the fabric of reality itself. Aislinn's hand stilled, her needle poised mid-stitch as her gaze lifted to the shadows gathering in the corner farthest from the fire. Her expression reflected neither fear nor surprise, only a soft anticipation that transformed her features with quiet joy.
"You're early tonight,"
she murmured, setting aside her embroidery and rising in a fluid motion that spoke of youth and vitality.
"The moons haven't even reached their zenith."
The shadows deepened, coalescing into a form that existed halfway between substance and mist. Pinpricks of starlight became visible within the darkness, arranging themselves into the suggestion of a tall figure whose edges remained indistinct, forever shifting between states of being. Nyx, a dreamwalker who had lived centuries since the imprisonment of the sorceresses, his star-filled eyes carrying the weight of countless human lifetimes, witnessed in dreams and reality alike.
"The prison walls thin as the solstice approaches,"
he explained, his multiple-voiced speech somehow intimate, despite its otherworldly resonance.
"My watch could not wait for nightfall."
He solidified further as he stepped into the firelight, taking on more human appearance, though never becoming fully substantial. The stars within his form remained visible, constellations shifting beneath what appeared to be skin, cosmic patterns flowing through his veins instead of blood. His features, when they settled into recognizable form, carried an ethereal beauty that blended masculine strength with something indefinably ancient. Aislinn crossed the room towards him, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. She reached up to touch his face, her fingers brushing through the misty edges of his form before finding solidity beneath. Their eyes met, hers deep brown with flecks of gold that caught the firelight, his the infinite darkness of space punctuated by distant stars.
"How long can you stay?"
she asked. The question weighted with history, with countless previous answers that had never been enough. Nyx's form rippled with emotion that transcended physical expression, stars brightening and dimming in patterns that Aislinn had learned to read as clearly as spoken words.
"Until the second moonset,"
he answered, one partially substantial hand rising to cradle her cheek with impossible gentleness.
"The first sorceress grows restless in her prison. Her dreams reach beyond the crystal walls, seeking vessels for her influence. The Dreamwalkers must maintain closer vigil during this cycle."
Disappointment flickered across Aislinn's features, quickly mastered and replaced with acceptance. She had known the terms of their impossible relationship from its beginning, had understood that his duty to safeguard the world from imprisoned powers would always claim priority over personal desires.
Then we have until second moonset.
She stated simply, her hand closing around his with quiet determination.
And I would not waste a moment of it in regret for what cannot change.
Nix's star-filled eyes studied her with wonder that had not diminished despite the years they had known each other. When he spoke, his multiple voices harmonized into something approaching reverence.
In all my centuries walking between worlds, I have never encountered a spirit like yours.
He told her, his form becoming more substantial as he fully committed his essence to this moment in physical reality.
You accept what others would rage against. You find contentment where others would know only bitterness.
Iceland smiled, the expression transforming her practical features with a warmth reserved solely for him.
Perhaps that is why we found each other.
She suggested, leading him toward the fire where she had arranged cushions on the floor, a simple comfort prepared for his visit.
You who have watched humanity's dreams for centuries needed to encounter someone who dreams of what is possible rather than impossible.
They settled beside the hearth, their forms creating a study in contrasts, her solid humanity against his starlit semi-substantiality, her mortal warmth against his ageless existence. Yet as they drew together, these differences seemed to blur, each reaching across the divide that separated their natures.
What have you dreamed of late?
He asked, a question that between them carried layers of meaning beyond its simple words. As a dreamwalker, he could access the dreamscape at will, could witness her unconscious mind's creations, yet he always asked, respecting the boundary between involuntary dreams and conscious sharing. Iceland's expression softened as she leaned against him, her head finding that perfect space between his shoulder and chest, where his form remained most substantial.
I dreamed of a child.
She admitted quietly, her voice barely audible above the fire's gentle crackling.
A boy with your stars in his eyes, though visible only in certain light. A child who could walk between worlds as you do, yet remain anchored in this one as I am.
Nix went very still, the stars within his form momentarily freezing in their eternal dance. When he spoke, his multiple voices carried undertones of both wonder and concern.
Such a child would belong to neither world completely,
he said carefully.
Caught between dream and waking, between immortality and mortality, between duty and freedom.
Yes,
she agreed, turning to meet his gaze directly.
As all children must find their own path between the worlds their parents create for them and the world they create for themselves.
Her hand found his, fingers intertwining with misty substantiality that solidified at her touch. Something passed between them in that contact. Understanding deeper than words could express, communication on a level that transcended their different natures.
It would be forbidden,
he whispered, though the stars within his form betrayed how the idea affected him. Constellations shifting into patterns that reflected longing, hope, fear.
The Dreamwalkers have maintained our vigil for centuries without creating new life. The risk of diluting our focus, our purpose.
Nix raised their joined hands, studying the contrast between her solid fingers and his semi-substantial ones. The firelight played across their entwined forms, casting shadows that seemed to dance, with possibilities neither had dared voice before this moment.
A child of dreamscape and reality,
he mused, his multiple voices blending into perfect harmony as he considered what once seemed impossible.
Neither fully dreamwalker nor fully human, but something new. Something
free.
She completed his thought, her brown eyes reflecting both firelight and starlight as she gazed at him.
Free to choose, to create, to become what neither of us could imagine alone.
The moment hung between them, pregnant with potential that resonated through both physical reality and the dreamscape. Nix's form wavered slightly, his eternal nature struggling with mortal desire, ancient duty competing with present love.
I cannot promise to be the father he would need.
He warned, his star-filled eyes troubled, despite the longing evident in his voice.
My vigil cannot end while the prisons stand. I could visit only between dreams, only in moments stolen from eternal watch.
Aislinn reached up to touch his face again, her fingers tracing features that solidified further beneath her touch. Her expression held no illusion, no romantic fantasy about changing what could not be changed.
I have never asked for promises you cannot keep.
She reminded him.
I would ask only that you love him as you can, when you can. The rest.
Her smile carried quiet confidence.
The rest I can provide.
Nick studied her face as if memorizing every detail, his star-filled eyes reflecting emotions that transcended simple categorization. After a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, he nodded, a single decisive movement that committed him beyond return.
Then let us dream together,
he whispered, leaning forward until his forehead rested against hers.
Let us create what has never existed before.
The vision blurred, firelight and starlight merging into a gentle haze that preserved the intimacy of what followed. Time seemed to slow, then accelerate, the cottage dissolving into fragments of sensory impression. The sound of whispered devotion, the sensation of forms merging beyond physical limitation, the sight of stars exploding into new constellations within the sanctuary of love temporarily stronger than duty. When clarity returned, the cottage reappeared in pre-dawn light. Aislinn lay sleeping on her bed, her expression peaceful in unconscious repose. Beside her stood Nyx, fully substantial in a way he rarely allowed himself to be, watching her with star-filled eyes that held both joy and sorrow in impossible balance.
He quickens within you already,
he murmured, one hand hovering just above her abdomen, where impossibly, incredibly, a new constellation had begun to form. Tiny pinpricks of light, visible only to his perception, marking the presence of something neither fully dream stuff nor fully flesh.
Our son, born of love that transcends worlds.
The second moon's edge disappeared beyond the horizon, its light fading from the small window. Nyx's form began to thin, substance returning to mist as his duty called him back to the eternal vigil. His expression carried the weight of centuries past and centuries yet to come, the knowledge that this momentary joy would be followed by separation, measured in dreams rather than days.
I will return when I can,
he promised, though Aislinn could not hear him in her sleep. His misty fingers brushed her cheek one final time before he began to fade from physical reality.
Watch for me in dreams, beloved, and know that our son carries starlight within him that will guide his path when neither of us can.
As his form dissolved completely, returning to the dreamscape where his vigilance was required, something remained behind. A single star that drifted down to settle in Aislinn's hair, a mark of silver white that would appear in their son's dark locks from the moment of his birth. A visible sign of the bridge he would become between worlds, between waking and dreaming, between prison and freedom. The vision began to fade, but not before Thalia glimpsed Aislinn's eyes opening, her hand immediately reaching for the empty space beside her, finding nothing but lingering warmth and the faint scent of starlight. Her expression held no surprise, no disappointment, only quiet acceptance and the first gentle curve of her hand protectively over her abdomen where new life had taken root against all possibility.
Sleep well, my wanderer,
she whispered to the empty room, somehow knowing he would hear her across the divide between worlds.
We will be waiting when you return.
Vision, darkness enveloped Thalia, not the comforting darkness of sleep, but something deeper, a void between moments, between heartbeats. Cold seeped into her awareness, not physical but existential, the chill of ancient knowledge stirring after centuries of dormancy. The dreamscape around her refused to settle, fracturing into crystalline patterns that reflected fragments of memory not her own. Gradually, the darkness coalesced into a vast circular chamber. 9 towering crystal structures rose from the obsidian floor, each pulsing with subdued light in distinctive colors. Gold, crimson, azure, emerald, violet, shadow black, verdant green, silver white, and that shifting iridescence that belonged to the 9th. The prison complex, seen from within rather than without, its geometric perfection both beautiful and terrible in its purpose. Unlike previous visions where she had been a passive observer, Thalia felt her consciousness fully present in this space, as if she had been summoned rather than simply witnessing. The air, if such a concept existed in this between place, vibrated with tension, with anticipation, with the weight of something approaching. Movement caught her attention. Between the crystal prisons, shadowy figures drifted like smoke, given momentary purpose. Dreamwalkers performing their eternal vigil, their star-filled eyes scanning for weakness in the structures they had guarded since their creation. They moved with the fluid grace of beings partially untethered from physical laws, trailing stardust in their wake. One separated from the others, approaching where Thalia's consciousness hovered. As it drew closer, its misty form gained definition. A female dreamwalker, centuries old yet ageless, the stars within her form arranged in constellations that spoke of ancient knowledge and terrible burden.
"You come at convergence?"
she stated, her multiple-voiced speech fragmented, as if reaching Thalia across vast distances of time and space.
"The vessel dreams open."
The chamber shuddered, crystal walls momentarily losing coherence before stabilizing again. Hairline fractures appeared along the golden prison's surface, glowing with internal light that leaked through like blood from a wound. The dreamwalker gestured towards the fractures, a star-lit hand leaving trails of light that lingered in the air between them.
"Prison weakens. First, reaches. Calls to blood. To dreams. 9 points. Must hold."
Her voice strained as if fighting interference, words dropping out and returning with uneven clarity.
"Pinions require renewal."
The term resonated in Thalia's mind. Pinions. An unfamiliar word that nonetheless carried weight beyond its syllables. She tried to speak, to ask for clarification, but found herself voiceless in this strange realm, capable only of listening, of receiving. The dreamwalker seemed to sense her confusion. With a gesture like scattered starlight, she caused the chamber to shift, to zoom outward until Thalia could perceive the entire prison complex from above. 9 crystal structures arranged in perfect geometric formation, connected by lines of force that created a complex lattice visible only from this perspective. At each intersection point glowed a concentrated nexus of power, 27 points where the lattice required greatest strength.
"The pinions. Hold matrix. First walker's essence, fading after centuries. New anchor required."
Her star-filled eyes fixed on Thalia with unsettling intensity.
"Blood calls to blood. Dream calls to dream."
The vision shifted again, bringing them closer to one of the nexus points. Within its crystalline structure, Thalia perceived something unexpected, a tiny fragment of consciousness, a splinter of the first walker's essence that had maintained the integrity of the prison matrix since its creation. This fragment glowed with failing light, its energy nearly exhausted after centuries of vigilance.
"First essence nearly gone. Without pinions, prison fails. Without prison, sorceress free."
Urgency threaded through her fragmented speech.
"Vessel of plague maker. Child of star walker. Must complete circuit. One must give what first gave.
Understanding began to form in Thalia's mind, terrible in its clarity. The prison required sacrifice, blood and essence to reinforce what time had weakened. The vessel of Plague-Maker could only be herself, descendant of Viola, whose blood carried the formula of the original Dream Plague. The child of Starwalker must be Elian, son of a Dreamwalker who could walk the paths between worlds. One of them must give what the first Walker gave, his life, his essence, to maintain the prison's integrity. The Dreamwalker's form flickered, the chamber around them destabilizing as some external force pulled at her presence.
Time fractures, convergence approaches. Vessel and child must come to chamber physical, must reach central nexus before solstice peak.
Her multiple voices strained further, words dropping out completely before returning.
Blood formula, star essence, combined will, renewal, sacrifice must.
The vision shattered before the sentence completed, fragmenting into shards of crystalline imagery that cut through Thalia's perception with painful clarity. Through these fragments, she glimpsed disconnected scenes, the golden prison cracking further, the first sorceress's indistinct form pressing against weakened barriers, desert sands shifting to reveal ancient paths, the 27 pinions glowing with diminishing light, Elian's form partially dissolving into stardust, her own blood flowing into crystal receptacles, a choice approaching like the edge of a precipice. One final image burned itself into her awareness before darkness reclaimed her. The first Walker's sacrifice centuries ago, his form dissolving into the matrix, his essence spread across 27 points to maintain the prison's integrity for generations. The ultimate price of containing gods who could not die but must not live. As the vision faded, the elder Dreamwalker's fragmented voice followed Thalia back toward consciousness, final words echoing with cryptic significance.
Not death, transformation. Not end, transition. Blood and star, together find what neither alone can achieve. Ancient formula, rewritten by new intent. Together they break, or together they seal.
The vision shattered like crystal struck by hammer. Water rushed into Thalia's lungs as her third breath finally gave out. Panic overwhelmed her as she thrashed, disoriented and desperate for air. Strong hands grasped her shoulders, hauling her upward. She broke the surface, gasping, hair plastered to her face, limbs trembling with cold that hadn't existed in the water before.
I've got you.
Elian's voice cut through her disorientation, steady and reassuring.
Breathe. You're safe.
She clung to him reflexively as he half-carried her from the pool to the stone edge, where Lyrienne waited with a thick blanket. The hydromancer wrapped it around Thalia's shivering form, her water tattoos pulsing with concern.
Too long,
she murmured, checking Thalia's pulse at her throat.
You were under far too long. The currents nearly claimed you. How long?
Thalia managed, her voice raw as though she'd been screaming.
17 minutes and 43 seconds,
he replied precisely.
Significantly exceeding recommended submersion duration of 45 seconds. Most interesting temporal dilation effect.
17 minutes? The knowledge struck her like physical blow. The visions had seemed to span hours, perhaps days, compressing vast swathes of history into impossible density.
You went ghost white before you surfaced,
he added, his usually boisterous voice subdued.
Started thrashing like a sand serpent caught in netting. Good thing Desert Walker here was watching so close.
Thalia became acutely aware of Elian's proximity, his arm still supporting her shoulders. The blanket had slipped slightly, revealing the now transparent fabric of her shift clinging to her skin. She adjusted the covering with trembling hands, creating distance between them despite her body's protest at the loss of his warmth.
What did you see?
He asked quietly, respecting her withdrawal. but remaining close enough to catch her if her shaking legs gave way. The visions crashed through her mind in fragmentary chaos, too much to process, too significant to dismiss. But one truth crystallized with terrible clarity. She was the blood of the Plague Maker, descendant of the woman who had created the original Dream Plague to fight the sorceresses. And Elian. She looked at him. Really looked, seeing for the first time the faint shimmer beneath his skin when crystal light struck at a certain angles. The way the silver streak in his hair seemed almost luminous in this ancient place. Half Dreamwalker, the heart of the dream child, the prophecy's other half.
I saw,
She began, but her voice failed as the enormity of the revelation overwhelmed her. How could she possibly explain? How could she tell this man, this person she was growing to care for with unexpected intensity, that they were bound by prophecy to either imprison or release ancient tyrants?
I saw the creation.
She managed finally, settling on partial truth.
The sorceresses. The making of the enhanced species. The rebellion.
The memories run deep here.
She nodded, her expression solemn.
The waters remember what humanity chooses to forget.
Were there specific temporal markers identifiable in the manifestation sequence?
He inquired, mechanical eyes adjusting as they studied her.
Historical documentation of pre-cataclysm events remains fragmentary at best.
Thalia shook her head, not trusting herself to elaborate further. The water had shown her not just history, but destiny. Her role and Elian's, inextricably intertwined. Together they would face the weakening prison. Together they would determine the fate of the Nine. But at what cost? The final vision haunted her, her blood mingling with his, power building around them in a ritual that seemed equal parts sacrifice and summoning. The first sorceress, stirring after millennia, fixing her with that terrible gaze of recognition. Every instinct told her the answer must be the former. The Nine had ruled as tyrants, reshaping humanity according to their whims, treating ordinary humans as raw material for their experiments. Their return would herald unimaginable suffering, but what would the strengthening of their prison require? What sacrifice would be demanded of the Plague Maker's blood and the Dream Child's heart?
Thalia.
Elian's voice drew her back to the present. He had moved closer again, concern evident in his expression.
You're still trembling. Whatever you saw, it doesn't have to be processed all at once.
His hand found hers beneath the blanket, a steadying warmth. The contact sent a jolt through her system. Not merely physical attraction, but something deeper, a recognition on levels beyond conscious awareness. Her blood knew his, called to it through layers of prophecy and destiny, which made what she must do all the more painful. She withdrew her hand carefully, wrapping the blanket more tightly around herself. A barrier. Protection. Though whether for herself or for him, she couldn't say.
I need time,
She said, her diplomatic training providing words when her heart failed.
The visions were overwhelming.
Something flickered in his dark eyes. Disappointment, perhaps, or confusion at her sudden withdrawal. But he nodded, respecting her space with the same quiet dignity he'd shown throughout their journey.
Of course.
He stepped back, hands falling to his sides.
We'll make camp at the chamber entrance. You can have privacy near the pool to rest and reflect.
Thank you,
She murmured, trying to infuse the simple phrase with all she couldn't say. Thank you for understanding. Thank you for not pressing. Thank you for being the person I could have loved in another life. One not bound by ancient prophecies and terrible choices. As the others moved toward the chamber entrance, she caught Elian looking back at her, the silver streak in his hair capturing the last of the crystal light. Something passed between them, a connection that transcended the physical distance she'd imposed. A recognition of what might have been. Then he turned away, leaving her alone with the knowledge the wellspring had bestowed and the burden of choice it represented. Thalia sank to her knees at the pool's edge, exhaustion claiming her as the ritual's energy expenditure caught up with her mortal frame. The water had returned to its obsidian stillness, reflecting stars and her own troubled face with equal indifference. Within its depths, secrets still waited, answers to questions she hadn't known to ask, destinies she hadn't been prepared to confront. Hours passed as she sat motionless, processing the fragments of vision. Dawn approached, painting the eastern sky visible through the chamber's circular opening with the first hint of rose-gold light. The crystal walls responded, their phosphorescence dimming as natural illumination returned to the world. From her position, she could see the others sleeping near the chamber entrance, all except Elian, who sat with his back against a crystal formation, eyes closed, but posture too alert for true sleep. Standing sentinel, as he had throughout their journey, protecting her even as she pushed him away. The pain in her chest had nothing to do with the ritual's aftermath, and everything to do with what she now understood she must sacrifice. The visions had shown her future as well as past, shown her that whatever grew between her and Elian could not simply be love between a man and woman. They were pieces in a game spanning millennia, their bloodlines engineered for purpose rather than happiness. Together they break, or together they seal. She had no doubt which outcome she must ensure. The sorceresses could not be allowed to return, not the tyrants who had treated humanity as experimental subjects, who had created enhanced species as tools for their dominion. But the prophecy's wording haunted her. Together. Whatever ritual would strengthen the failing prison would require both of them, their bloods and hearts united in purpose. Could she ask that of him? Drag him into a destiny he hadn't chosen, toward a potential sacrifice he knew nothing about? More selfishly, could she bear to grow closer to him, knowing what waited at their journey's end? Logic provided the answer emotion resisted. Distance now would hurt them both, but less than attachment followed by inevitable sacrifice. Better to maintain formal separation, to be allies in purpose, but nothing more intimate. Better to guard her heart against what couldn't last. As the first direct sunlight touched the crystal walls, transforming them from ghostly blue to rainbow prisms, Thalia made her choice. She would keep the full truth of the visions to herself, would accept the mantle of destiny the wellspring had revealed to be her birthright, would maintain enough distance from Elian to ensure that when the time came for whatever sacrifice the prison demanded, she could make it without hesitation. The self-imposed isolation felt like a stone in her chest, heavy and cold despite the warming dawn. But duty had been her companion since childhood. The awareness that personal desire must always yield to the greater needs of Aquilon. This was merely an extension of that principle, expanded to encompass not just a single walking city, but potentially all humanity. She rose stiffly, muscles protesting after hours of immobility. The others stirred at her movement, beginning to wake as daylight strengthened. Elian's eyes opened immediately, finding her across the chamber with that same intense focus she'd felt since their first meeting. Something passed between them, a current deeper than words, an understanding neither could articulate. Thalia steeled herself against it, drawing the mantle of diplomatic neutrality around her like armor. She approached the group with measured steps, her expression composed into the mask she'd worn for years in Aquilon's political arena.
We should depart soon,
she announced, her voice carrying the practiced authority of the Fathermark's daughter.
The wellspring has shown what was needed. Our return journey should begin before the heat of day makes travel difficult.
You've recovered from the ritual then?
She asked, water tattoos rippling with subtle concern.
The waters took much from you.
I am well enough to travel,
she replied, the diplomatic evasion coming naturally.
Whatever weakness remains will pass with time.
Elian studied her face, seeing beyond the composed exterior to the turmoil beneath. a perception that both comforted and terrified her. If anyone could break through her carefully constructed barriers, it would be this man with his quiet understanding and unwavering presence.
The Wellspring's gifts often come with costs,
he said quietly.
Some revelations need time to find their proper place within us.
The insight struck too close to her hidden truth. She inclined her head in acknowledgement, but offered no further opening, moving instead to where her travel clothes had been neatly folded. Her back deliberately turned to the group as she gathered her belongings. Behind her, she heard the others preparing for departure. Kirshen's boisterous movement, Tavor's precise adjustments to his equipment, Lyrian's soft murmurs as she communed with the water carried in her specialized containers. And beneath it all, Elian's thoughtful silence, more eloquent than any words could have been. When they departed an hour later, the sun fully risen above the desert horizon, Thalia positioned herself between Lyrian and Tavor, deliberately avoiding the proximity to Elian that had become natural during their journey to the wellspring. He noticed, but made no comment, simply adjusting their formation to accommodate her unspoken preference. As they left the crystalline chamber behind, the striders making their way up the sloping passage toward daylight, Thalia permitted herself one backward glance. The wellspring gleamed in the morning light, its surface once again an obsidian mirror, reflecting possibilities both realized and abandoned. Like her heart, it contained depths visible only to those who dared full immersion, and like her future, it offered no compromise between destiny and desire. She turned away, facing the desert that waited beyond the chamber's protective embrace. Whatever grew between her and Elian, whatever might have flowered in another life, must be sacrificed to the greater purpose the wellspring had revealed. The path forward permitted no selfish detours, no matter how desperately her heart might wish otherwise. The burden of knowledge settled across her shoulders like a physical weight as they emerged into the harsh desert sun. Behind her mask of diplomatic composure, Thalia mourned what could never be, even as she committed herself to the destiny she could not escape. Together they break, or together they seal. The prophecy would be fulfilled. She would ensure the prison held, no matter the personal cost. And if that cost included the chance at love with a man whose bloodline complemented her own in ways she was only beginning to understand, then so be it. Some prices, however painful, must be paid for the greater good. Squaring her shoulders, she urged Sirocco forward, keeping her gaze fixed on the horizon and away from the silver-streaked hair that caught the sunlight like a beacon she no longer permitted herself to follow.